video for English 102 here at Brooklyn State University. The video is going to concern the play Antigone. The play is your first required reading for this class, and it will be the text, the primary text you'll use in order to write your first paper for this class. I have a few notes to go over for the text, things for you to be paying attention to, things for you to think about, and as a result of this discussion, it might help you find ideas within the text that you can explore in your very first paper. So the first thing I want you to keep in mind as you're reading through the play is, what does each character argue? Antigone, our main character, she has an argument she wants to make. Antigone's sister is Mani, has an argument she wants to make. Creon, the king of the city, he has an argument he wants to make. And then Creon's son, Haman, he comes onto the scene and he has an argument that he makes. And Tiresias, the ancient blind prophet, he has an argument that he makes. Now there are other characters in the play, but these characters take up the bulk of the stage time. They have the bulk of the words, and all the action that happens in the play is a result of these characters. But not only ought we to pay attention to what each character argues, specifically we need to pay attention to what does this character say, and then what does this character do. Because oftentimes words can be undercut by our actions. It's important to look closely and see, is what this character is doing, does that align with what he has said? The other thing I want you to consider is, what is the argument the play is making? Oftentimes when writing a paper that's dealing with a text like this, writers will draw a line of dialogue or a quote from the text. They will say, this is what the quote means and this is what the play is promoting. We have to be very mindful here that just because one character says a thing does not mean that's what the entire play is trying to say. And if it's any help to you, you could go to the very end of the play, the chorus, they come onto the stage and they have a short speech at the end of the play which tells you, here's what the playwright Sophocles, here's what he wants you to remember. You will probably remember a lot of things from the play, but here is that one thing you can walk away with, grapple with. But not only does the chorus come onto the scene and give us the main argument of the play, the chorus says a few other things throughout the play that sets us up for or calls attention to us as the readers of, okay, here's what the play is trying to explore. And in one word, the main argument or the main topic that the play is arguing for is a thing called wisdom. So you could write a paper exploring what is wisdom. How ought you to define wisdom? How have others defined wisdom? How do you find this thing called wisdom? What does it look like if you have wisdom? Or who is someone that you would say is a wise person? What does that mean? So keep in mind, what are the characters arguing? What is the text arguing? The other thing I want you to ask yourself is, what sort of conflicts have you had in your life or are you going through right now? Conflicts with someone within your family. I'm certainly not advocating arguing with family and causing fights, but home is where we are born, and it's where our first relationships often take place. And sometimes it's where some of our most difficult conflicts come about. And secondly, I want you to think, well, what are the conflicts you might have with the state or with the law, for that term in general? Are there certain laws in place that you would say, I don't like that law? Well, what's your argument for why you don't like that law? Is it a good law and you just don't like the inconvenience of it? Or is it a foolish law? Is it an immoral law? I'll talk more about that in just a minute. And be thinking about what conflicts you might have with God. You might say, well, I'm not a religious person. I don't believe in God. Okay. You can substitute that with what conflicts do you have with the natural world, with the universe, as some people might say. But if you are of a religious bent, of course, in this class, you can write a paper on politics and religion or both. And it's one reason why I assigned the play Antigone, because it's a play that has family, it has politics, it has religion, all these three major aspects of the human condition. All throughout time, human beings have been having families, are connected to families in some way, and have to deal with political structures, governmental structures, people who are in charge, and have to answer to some sort of what we might call higher authority, whether they believe that that is God or Jehovah or Jesus or Allah or the collective conscience or natural selection. It's worth thinking about. The other question I have for you is, what law would you break and be justified? And not just justified because you say so, but what higher authority might you be able to answer to? In the United States of America, for example, there might be a law that you would say, I'm not going to obey because it is unconstitutional. Just recently reading the works of Abraham Lincoln, he was against the American war in Mexico. He supported the war as it played out because he wanted the soldiers to be able to have what they needed. But he and many others were opposed to that war because they said it was an unconstitutional war. That's all I'll say about that right now. Here's a few ideas where other texts and other thinkers have dealt with this issue of, well, what's the right type of the law that we ought to follow, and if we're not going to follow it, what sort of arguments do we make? There's an old story that comes from what's known as the Old Testament, a book called Exodus, in which these Hebrew midwives, they were technically slaves at that time, were ordered by the king of Egypt to kill any Jewish boys as they were being born. So you think of a Pharaoh of Egypt who is believed to be descendant from the gods of Egypt, is giving a command to these slave women. And these slave women chose to disobey the king's authority. Is it because they had a problem with a king? I doubt it. Is it because they didn't like men? I doubt it. Was it because they knew there's something immoral, there's something unethical in the killing of a child as it's born? So these women took a great risk to defy the king in that place. There's another example that comes from what's known as the Gospels in the New Testament. There's a passage in which Jesus is asked, what ought you to pay? Ought you to pay your taxes? And then the scene, Jesus asks the people that he's with to give him a coin. And a coin at this time, the Romans were in charge of the land of Israel, much of that Middle Eastern, Mediterranean world at this time. And Jesus asks the audience whose face, whose image is on this coin. It's the face of Caesar. Jesus responds by saying, render or give unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. Give unto God that which is God's. So it brings into question that there are some things that belong to Caesar, probably your taxes. Then there are other things that belong to God. There's a higher authority that supersedes that, even Caesar. And when you read the play Antigone, you will find that this is Antigone's argument. She is not opposed to the law. She is not opposed to men, even though within the text there are some comments made of men do not like women. But there are other men in the text who do appreciate women and do like them. And Antigone's argument is, I'm not breaking the law just because I want to. I'm not breaking the law because I ultimately hate men and no one can tell me what to do. although it might be possible that no one can tell Antigone what to do. Antigone's argument is rooted in the fact that there is a higher authority than human beings. That authority for Antigone are the gods. And what have the gods told us to do? The gods have told us to do something when it comes to our dead bodies. When people are dead, we must bury their bodies. When Creon comes on to the scene and says, I'm going to write a law which will not allow you to bury certain people, now we have Antigone and Creon in an intense conflict. But consider Creon's argument where he talks about why he doesn't want certain people to be buried. Does he have a good argument? Might he have tempered his argument a little bit? It's worth thinking about. And a few more ideas of people who have wrestled with the law over the years. Again, there's Abraham Lincoln. In his first inaugural address, one of the things he asks the audience to do is please abide by the law. Sounds pretty good. Then he starts talking about a specific law, a law called the Fugitive Slave Act. The Fugitive Slave Act said if a slave escaped from a slave state, that slave must be returned to his or her master. Lincoln goes out and lays out why this must be so, and his primary argument is because that is the law. So let's abide by the law rather than break it, but if the law is not a good one, let us rewrite the law. I'm sure most of us staying in that audience today would think, if a slave shows up at my door that has escaped, I will help him or her escape. I say that knowing that I'm an admirer of Lincoln. Of course, Lincoln, would do other things down the road in order to help that situation. Another thing to consider is Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous text, A Letter from Birmingham Jail, which you will be assigned to read later this semester. And in that text, Martin Luther King is in jail, and he's writing to a group of fellow pastors and clergymen and rabbis and priests who are critical of MLK, because MLK has broken the law. He has ended up in jail. And MLK has a fascinating passage in that letter in which he says, here's why I can advocate that we follow the law in certain cases, and here's why I can advocate that we break the law in certain cases. And I'll say this, MLK's breaking of the law was done in a much more civil and respectful manner than many lawbreakers within the last several years. It's going to be a worthwhile passage for you to read. Okay, so keep in mind what each character is arguing. Keep in mind what the text itself is arguing. Think about the conflicts that you have with your family, with the law, the state, with God, or with a higher authority, higher power. On that note, think of the conflicts you have even within yourself. Be thinking about what law might you break and still be justified. And on the other hand, if you were, how would you advocate for a law that ought to be followed and isn't? And then as you read through the play, there's a few scenes I want you to keep in mind and look at closely. The first thing I want you to keep in mind is the very first scene. Antigone and Ismene. How are they talking with one another? What is Ismene's response when Antigone asks Ismene to help her break the law? Ismene does not come right out and say, no, I'm not going to do that. She gives several answers first, and then when she's finally pushed on it, no, I don't want to help you because I don't want to be put to death for breaking the law. It's a pretty good argument. But then pay attention to how Antigone treats her sister, and Ismene refuses to help her. The next thing I want you to keep in mind is the scene that has Antigone and King Creon and Ismene in it. Look at what each character is saying to each other. Then I want you to pay attention to the scene between Creon and his son Haman. How does Haman start off talking to his father? And how does Haman react when he realizes, I'm not going to get anywhere with my dad? To that point, how does Creon react when he starts to discover that Haman does not agree 100% with his father. And then lastly, I want you to pay attention to the scene between Creon and Tiresias, the old blind prophet. Watch how Tiresias establishes his credibility with Creon and then gives Creon the news that Creon does not want to hear. How does Creon respond to Tiresias? So pay attention to that scene. All right? Again, the play might be a little difficult or challenging to read. It's going to be very much worth your while. If you have any questions about the play, you may email me. We can set up a Google Meet. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts on the play, and I look forward to you starting to work on this first paper in the class.